Okay. Okay, I think we should be live now.
Yeah, we are live. Let's start.
Okay, we are
We-
live.
Let's wait for 5 minutes and let people join, and then you can start. Okay.
Yeah. Am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Okay, so we are starting the stream right now. This stream will be the guest talk by Mr. Yash Mehta. So this talk is conducted by All Isocubic Society (AICS) under
Am I
Tenacity.
audible?
Yeah, you're audible. So uh, this in this
One of
guest
the
talk,
co-members, please, know if I'm audible.
yeah, yes, you're audible. In this talk, we are going to be, Mr. Yash Mehta will talk about method development and how to invent a speed cubing method. He'll guide us upon development of methods in cubing, and he'll cover the pros and cons of commonly used algorithms. Ideas like orienting some or all pieces before solving, reducing move sets, option select, symmetries, etc. will also be introduced. So let us welcome Mr. Yash Mehta.
Hello, everyone. I suppose I am audible. If I'm not, please stop me in the middle so we
Yeah,
can
you're audible.
the connections. So let me begin by talking about the introduction. So first of all, we had initially planned Bhargav Narasimhan would give the first talk and I would give the second talk. Bhargav is the national one-handed record holder. We expect, but unfortunately, he came down with COVID symptoms just a couple of days back, so we couldn't conduct that talk. So instead of that, I'll be taking that time slot. And I had planned only a 20 to 25-minute talk because we had to fit two talks. I'll try to extend it a little bit, but I have decided not to include any more material because I do not want to dilute the content. So let's talk about method development in general. So speed cubing as such is a sport of speed. You try to solve the Rubik's Cube as quickly as possible. Now, in such a situation, it's definitely much more like a sport than like a science, right? So as science students ourselves, most of the audience here are from ISERS and ISC. As science students ourselves, we would want to do things that are more scientifically oriented. And the thing in speed cubing that is scientifically oriented is method development. Or if you're into materials, this hardware development as well. So method development is basically you developing or coming up with a certain number of steps to go from a completely scrambled state of a cube all the way up to a solved state. And please note the word speed cubing method here. So what I'll be focusing on is a method that you can use to solve the cube as quickly as possible, as opposed to in as few moves as possible, etc. So first, a little note on who I am. I'm basically a physics undergrad student at the Indian Institute of Science. I'm in my fourth year, and I started cubing when I was in 10th grade. That is in 2014. It's been 6 to 7 years since I've been speed cubing, and it's been more or less regular. I've won a few competitions in blindfolded and FMC competitions. I have a couple of podiums in one-handed and all of that, but I think the most important podiums that I've had were the big blind podiums at Indian Nationals 2018. And if anybody cares, I have an unofficial Guinness World Record as well, where I solved a cube with another person, me using my left hand, the other person using their right hand. So it's called solving a cube in a team of two. But all of this is absolutely unimportant. The point is that I have made two quite popular speed cubing methods in the past. And as long as you have the tools and the experience, you can do the same even if you have less or much more accomplishments than I do. So let's talk about one of the methods that I have made in the past to set up the tone for the talk. There was something called the Mehta Method that I have named after myself. It was a method that I thought would be an algorithm-based method because CFOP is the most popular method nowadays, and among all the other popular methods, CFOP is also the most algorithm-based method. So I thought it would be a good idea to, instead of having to solve end in two algorithms like OLL and PLL in CFOP, the Mehta method ends in three algorithmic steps. That was the plan initially. And as you can see, this flow chart, which probably will not make any sense to most of you, is what we ended up with. Basically, what you do is, instead of going in a linear fashion, as in solving the cross F2L, OLL, PLL, you basically have a lot of branches, and you can pick any of the paths to reach the solved state. This particular thing is called option select, about which I'll talk later. So the idea started in August of 2020 during the pandemic. And the important thing here is the fact that it was not an overnight thing. I did not, dream up something and then worked on it the next morning and published it. It was something that was developed over a course of 3 to 4 months, and I was not the only person who developed it. There were many other people, some of whom contributed more than I did in some senses. And all of the important things about the method, like the option select basis, or one of the most important parts called the TDR path, it's something that I'll talk about later. All of these things were not introduced in August. In fact, these things came along in November and December. So the point is, the Mehta method, just like every other method that has been developed, was developed in an entire very long and tedious developing process. And currently, the Mehta method is slowly gaining popularity. Timon Kolashinsky, Matti Inaba, and Patrick Pons are some of the pretty fast speed cubers who have been trying this method out. There are a couple of other fast speed cubers as well who are giving it a shot. And of course, there is a lot of criticism as well, just like there will be in all the methods, and only time will tell whether it will be a good method or not. But the point is, it's slowly getting popular. So for now, people are considering it a possible candidate for the top 4 methods that there are. As you might know, there is CFOP, ZZ, RU, and Petrus. So people are talking about how Mehta can replace Petrus in the top 4. And here I have given a GitHub link. We'll post this in the comments. I'll not talk more about the Mehta method because I just wanted to talk about the amount of time and effort it took to develop it rather than what it exactly is. So if you are interested in what the method exactly is, you can go to the GitHub link. It is a very in-depth explanation which contains basically everything that there is to know about the Mehta method. And more importantly, on the about page of the website, you will see a couple of a bit of theoretical basis on which Mehta was developed if you want to delve into that. Basically, I talk about you exploiting symmetries of the cube, which I will not talk about a lot in this talk because I want to keep it fairly accessible to beginners because Bhargav's talk has been delayed. So now we'll talk about what method development exactly is. Well, obviously, method development means you develop new methods, but it's not exactly limited to that. There are a lot more things that are included in method development. For example, if you have a pre-existing method like ZZ, you could come up with new variants of that method, and that would still count as method development. The methods like ZZ are flexible enough that you can end the solve or begin the solve in a lot of different ways and attach them onto the basic ZZ framework and just come up with a new variant. On the other hand, methods like RU are slightly less flexible, although you can come up with variants. It's difficult to find variants that are as accessible as the main path. Then you can come up with new subsets. So for example, there is something called PLL, or permutation of last layer. That is an algorithm. It's an algorithm subset of the ZZ method, for example, of ZBLL, for example. There is COLL, there is 2GLL. All of these algorithm sets are subsets of some larger algorithm set. So you could come up with new algorithm sets and their subsets, or you could isolate a couple of subsets from larger alg sets that you can learn. Then there are recognition and prediction techniques. So there is the BH system for ZBLL recognition. Also, there are prediction techniques like ROLL and JOLL, ROLL and JOLL. Then obviously there is algorithm generation. So you could generate algorithms for particular cases. So for example, of late we have seen a lot of new ZBLL and PLL algorithms coming up based on the new cubing hardware that we have, because now we have access to more finger tricks. And basically any new solving idea. For example, you could have come up with edge, or the idea of edge orientation in early 2000s, or you could have come up with the idea of corner permutation before starting the solve in 2012 or 13. So any new solving idea that you can come up with, even if you don't come up with an entire method around it, would still count as method development. And at the end of the day, including all of these things, we have method comparison. So you can just take two methods and you can give your comments on how they fare against each other, how good is a particular method, what you can do to improve it. Basically, the general idea. And this will flow very nicely onto the next slide of how to compare methods is method metrics. How can you realize how good a method is? How can you, in some sense, quantify it? So there are a couple of factors that you look at when you look at a method in no particular order of importance. First of all, the most obvious thing is move count. Basically, if you program a computer to solve a cube like a human, but you just do it hundreds of thousands or millions of times, then you get a certain distribution of the number of moves it takes the computer to solve the cube. And basically, the average and the standard deviation would characterize the move count of the method. So, for example, CFOP has a move count between 54 and 62. That is a move count of the method in 1 sigma. Then there is the cap TPS for each step. So, for example, for RU, the LSE cap TPS would be somewhere around 12, 13 turns per second, while for PLL it can go all the way to 20, 25 turns per second. Then obviously, this includes a lot of things like if you're block building, if you're making the Petrus 2x2x2, your turning speed will be very slow compared to if you're solving F12 on C4. So that is an idea of the TPS, or turns per second, for each step. Then there is the recognition and setup time for each step. So if you are recognizing a ZBLL, it will obviously take you much more time than recognizing an OLL. So, and also if you are recognizing ZBLL from all angles compared to recognizing ZBLL from only one angle, so you need to set up the case. So all of these will take time. So these are different reasons why your solve can slow down. Then there is the algorithm count, the number of algorithms that you need to know to learn the method. For example, for CFOP, it is 21 PLL algorithms and 57 OLL algorithms if you don't include F12 algorithms. So that is a total of 78 last layer algorithms that you need to know for CFOP. Compared to if you want to learn ZZ, then you'll need to learn almost 500 algorithms because you need to learn the entirety of ZPML. Then you have move sets and alg quality. By move sets, what I mean is in RU, you end the solve using only M and U moves. So the MU move set is the last move set for RU. Compared to that, ZZ has RUL moveset for after solving the EO line. Basically, you can solve the entire cube using RU and L moves. For CFOP, it is RU moves, but along with cube rotations and so on. And then you have algorithm quality. It's sort of in the same box because if you have a good moveset, you'll also usually have good alg quality. If your algorithm is 2gen, if your algorithm is not absurdly long, if your algorithm does not have like 5 different moves or a lot of double turns, then the alg quality is good. It's a fairly qualitative idea. And then you have blind spots. In some sense, this is a part of recognition, but it also hinders your confidence when you're turning. So when you do RU, you have a couple of blind spots on the back of the cube, which you do not have when you are doing CFOP when you solve F12 pairs at the back. So in order to minimize blind spot, you usually try to solve the back of the cube first, and then you solve the front and the top of the cube. And there are a lot of other factors that you can think of. For example, learning difficulty, how easy it is to expand on the method if you have already learned everything about the method, and so on. So as you can see, these are a lot of ideas, and if you want to be able to implement them, be able to understand all of these, you can start by trying to understand why certain methods are better than other methods. For example, RU and CFOP are clearly better than Petrus. That is what we accept nowadays. And the reason for that is the current hardware enables us to turn much faster, so we can think less for each turn that we make, and so on. So these reasonings can help you develop this intuition, and the way to do that is to learn as many methods as possible. So there's something called the speed solving wiki. You can just look for it on Google. The speed solving wiki lists a lot of the famous methods that there are out there for all, including 3 by 3, 3 by 3, one-handed, and big cubes. It includes all of those methods, and you can look through those methods, try to understand them, and see if you can spot why certain methods are better than the ones that you read over there. So now when you're developing a method, there are a bunch of common ideas that people do. Firstly, obviously, it's solving pieces. If you look at a piece, you can directly solve it. That's what permutation of last layer does. You look at pieces and you solve them. That's what ZBLL does, for example. You look at a piece and you solve it. Then there is full or partial orientation. You can do that for edges, you can do that for corners. For example, in CFOP, OLL, orientation of last layer, what it does is it does not exactly solve all of the pieces, it basically orients them. That means if you're solving white on bottom, yellow on top, what it'll do is all of the stickers on the top layer will be facing yellow upwards. That is orientation of the last layer pieces for CFOP. And of course, you can expand this notion to the entire cube. ZZ does edge orientation at the beginning of the solve. And then there's domino reduction, in which you also do corner orientation. Then there are ideas like block building and pseudo block building. In some sense, it is the same as solving pieces, but instead of trying to preserve other things, in block building, what you do is you usually do it in the beginning of the solve, and you solve multiple pieces at a time instead of going piece by piece. So F12 would be a small example of block building. Better examples are the Petrus 2 by 2 by 2 block, or the Roo 1 by 2 by 3 block. And of course, a pseudo block building is if you make a block that is one move away from being solved. So if you have heard of the Heise method, HEISE, Heise method, what it does is it builds a 2 by 2 by 2 block, but it's not necessary that it's a solid 2 by 2 by 2 block. It can be a D away from being solved. So at the end of the solve, after you have put in a lot of pseudo blocks together, you can do a couple of moves and finish F12 -1. Then there is the idea of moveset reduction. So if you are solving a cube, usually you'll need 5 to 6 types of moves to solve the entire cube. But if you look at ZZ, the first step is EO line. So when you do the edge orientation and solve the DF and DB pieces, you can solve the rest of the cube using only 3 kinds of moves: right, up, and left. The same is true for Roo, where you reduce the entire cube to be solved completely using M and U moves. So what you did was you reduced the move set to a smaller subset of UDBFLR, so that you can fix your finger position so that you'll be able to turn the cube faster. Then there is the idea of option select. This is sort of a new idea, although I mean, some people have been doing it for a long time. Basically, BLL. So these are the different options that you have at the same state of the solve. Then there is symmetry exploitation. I'm not going to go in depth on this topic. You can read up about it on the GitHub website that I talked about initially. Basically, the point is this is a very small list of common ideas, and you can come up with anything.
Sorry to disturb, Yash, but you got disconnected and now your screen is not being shared.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, no problem.
Let me know if my screen comes up again. Also, was my voice audible the whole time?
No, no. You'll have to start a bit after option select.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
So what I'll do is I'll just stop sharing and share again. Okay, let me know if it shows up now. Did it show up?
Not yet.
Now?
No, not still not there.
Okay, so what I'll do is I'll switch my Wi-Fi. I'm sorry for the delay. So IISc is having connectivity issues for the past week. Because of that, we haven't been able to stream things of late. Just give me a second. Wi-Fi. Is my screen visible now?
Not yet.
Mm-hmm. So if it doesn't show up for the next half minute, I'll just rejoin the meeting. All right. So I'm assuming it did not show up. I'll just rejoin the meeting.
Yeah, okay.
All right. Am I audible?
Yeah, you're audible.
So I have shared the screen now. Let me know if it shows up.
Yeah, now it's showing.
Cool. I'll continue from here, although not much of the talk is left. Give me a second. Right, so we were at common ideas. I talked about option select, where you don't necessarily need to solve the cube linearly. For example, if you have solved the first two layers and the top edge cross is solved or oriented correctly, then you can do COLL followed by EPLL, or you can do OCLL followed by PLL, or you can simply do ZBLL. You basically have multiple options, and depending on which algorithm or which path is the best or the fastest, you can use that path and try to shave off a couple of milliseconds of your time. So that's the idea of option select. And then there's symmetry exploitation. I'm not going to go in depth. I have talked about it on the website that I have linked if you want to know more about it. But basically, anything that you can come up with is valid. There are a lot of ideas that I have not mentioned here, and as if you read up about a lot of different methods, then you'll come to know of a lot of different ideas that there exist. All of these ideas that I have mentioned now are the ones that are used in the top methods right now. So the idea is for you to understand as many methods as possible and see what ideas you can extract and then use those ideas to build your own method. Now, of course, we need to talk about algorithm sets when we talk about method development. Algorithm sets is basically when you go from one step to the next step using a single algorithm. Basically, you recognize a case, you do the algorithm for that case, and you are already on the next step. That is the idea of algorithmic steps. So there's very little intuition involved. You just have to recognize and solve. And there's a reason why you do the intuitive portions of the solve in the beginning and algorithm steps at the end. Two reasons that you can sort of get an intuition around this is, firstly, in the beginning of the solve, there are multiple pieces that are unsolved. So if you try to solve three pieces in the beginning of the solve using an algorithm, they can be anywhere on the cube. So you'll need a lot more algorithms to solve them rather than during the end of the solve. The second point is that initially you don't really care about messing up other things because you've solved very cube. So you can intuitively solve things in very few moves. Whereas at the end of the solve, when you have already solved a big portion of the cube, you will have a lot more things that you'll have to preserve after each step. So it is difficult to intuitively do those things, which is why you usually reserve the algorithmic steps for the end of the method. This is not always the case, but this is usually the way people do it. Now, when you're comparing algorithms, the length of algorithm is not very important. For example, a lot of people can do the 21 move n perm, the one that has, r, u, r prime, u prime, and then you do a j perm. That's like 20, 21 moves. And a lot of people can do that faster than the 14 move v perm. So the algorithm length is not exactly very relevant in comparing to algorithms, but the quality of the algorithm is. Certain algorithms have regrips, certain algorithms have like 4 or 5 different kinds of moves, which makes it slightly slower than other algorithms. There are finger resets and a lot of other things that you can read up about. Also, whatever method that you make up, the algorithm count obviously must be reasonable. Like you can come up with a method and you can solve f12 minus 1, and then you can say just use one algorithm to solve the entire cube from there. But obviously that will take like hundreds of thousands of algorithms, and for most people that is not a reasonable number of algorithms. So what you do is you break it into two parts. For example, you can solve the last pair while orienting edges, and then you can solve the rest of the cube, and you'll have like 800, 850 algorithms for that. And this method is actually called the ZB method. So when you make an algorithm, when you make a method, you need to give the algorithm count, and that must be reasonable. Obviously, the ideal number is somewhere around 100, but maybe you can push it to 1,000. Now, sometimes what happens is, for example, in CFOP, you have one algorithmic step followed by another algorithmic step. And you are reducing the number of cube states in parts. So first you have the entire last layer unsolved, then you have the last layer oriented but not solved, and then you solve it. So what you try to do is, in the two steps, for example, OL and PLL in this case, you try to have roughly a similar number of algorithms. For example, 21 and 57 is the same order of magnitude. But if you try to break it into two parts with such that the first step is simply to orient the edges and the second step is ZBLL, obviously that's a worse way to do it in most cases because the number of algorithms will be very high for that. So the reason for this is some basic cube states algebra. It's like when you multiply two numbers to get a certain constant and you want to minimize their sum, you need to ensure that both of those numbers are as close to each other as possible. It's as simple as that. I have talked a little bit about cube states algebra on the GitHub page that I have mentioned, so you can check that out. And a very important part about alg sets is the recognition. That's why I've put it in caps. I should have put in bold as well with an exclamation, with 2 exclamation points, because a lot of people they don't really care about recognition when they're coming up with alg sets. But the thing is, recognition is extremely important. We know that orienting steps are usually easier than permuting steps. That's why people can recognize OLLs usually faster than PLLs. People can recognize one side of the cube faster than multiple sides of the cube. That is why the belt method is slower. The belt method is where you solve the equator slice, then the top and the bottom. In that, you'll have to recognize two sides of the cube, the top and the bottom. So that's not ideal. So that's why you need to keep in mind recognition, where all of the things are on the same side of the cube, and you need to prioritize the orientation recognition. And obviously, there are a lot of things that I have not mentioned here. Recognition is a big topic of its own, so you can read more about it as well. And if you want to make algorithms, there are a lot of great online tools like Cube Explorer, Alg Explorer, and there are a lot more. The thing that I prefer to do is I try to code up my own algorithm generator, because that gives me the freedom to do things. But if you're not big into coding, then you can look up Cube Explorer, Alg Explorer, and you can make an entire algorithm set using which you can come up with the algorithms, and then you can sort through which ones are the best and the worst, and then you can rate your algorithm set. And then finally, if you want to compare two algorithms among each other, then obviously what you can do is you can spam that algorithm on the cube multiple times and time yourself. Or you can use something called the move count coefficient calculator. One of the Mehta developers other than myself, name is Vincent Prang, came up with this while we were developing the Mehta method. So basically you plug in a couple of algorithms that you want to compare in this move count coefficient calculator, and the move count coefficient calculator will rate each of the algorithms based on how our fingers move. Of course, this is not a perfect tool, but it helps you narrow down and select from a couple of best algorithms. So if you have 200 candidate algorithms for the same case, you can greatly reduce this number using the MCC. And for my final slide, obviously, we'll talk about method statistics. Nowadays, it's extremely important that when you claim that your method is, for example, 48 moves on average, plus minus 3, you should be able to substantiate your claim by simulating your method on the computer. So you can either write a code for doing that, or you can use something called HARCs. Here is another RCS. I'm not entirely sure what the entire full form of this is, but it's a software that's fairly easy to use, and you can make custom methods to some limit in HARCs, and you can simulate them. You can simulate hundreds of thousands of solves. You can have custom ALG sets if you want, and it'll give you the number of moves required to solve each step on average, and you can submit that to whatever place you're discussing your method at. Obviously, the step-by-step stats are helpful because in some cases, for example, you happen to invent F12. Sometimes what happens is there are a lot of tricks in F12 that you just cannot come up with all of a sudden. So if you have a software to simulate your methods, you'll be able to figure out a lot of tricks to solve certain cases, and that is why simulating your solves is a good idea. But again, an extremely important note, computer numbers are not necessarily relevant. Computer numbers are just how many moves it takes a computer to solve it. It does not factor how much risk is involved. It does not factor what finger tricks are used, does not factor in the recognition, and it does not factor in how efficient you can be. For example, for the second block of roux, the computer says that you can always solve it in 11 moves roughly, but the computer says you can always solve it in 7 to 8 moves roughly, but humans take about 11 to 12 moves. So this is a pretty big gap of 4 to 5 moves, and that is why the computer numbers are just an indication of what your method is like. And now finally we'll talk about the community. This is the most intimidating part of for any of us, including in the scientific community. The most intimidating part is collaboration. In some senses, we do not want to talk about our own method to other people because we might get plagiarized, we might get demotivated. But the point is, this is an extremely important step, especially nowadays. First of all, it'll give you a lot of new ideas because there are a lot of people with a lot of different expertise in cubing. One person cannot know everything. Secondly, there may be a lot of old methods that you are not aware of, which other people are aware of. And your method might overlap in some parts to that old method. So you can use the development used in that method into your method, and you can save a lot of time. Also, you can distribute a lot of work so that you can progress fast. So in particular, when I was making the Mehta method, we were a group of about 5 to 10 developers, depending on what stage of development it was, and that is how we were able to be able to develop the method to the extent in 3 to 4 months. Some of the people were into making websites. Some of the people were into generating algorithms and testing them. Some of the people were into finding tricks for the intuitive steps, and some of the people were just coming up with new ideas and drilling them and simulating the solves. So basically, what you do is you try to publicize your method in the community, and that will attract testers, tech people, and so on. Some good tools to publicize your method are Facebook communities, Reddit communities. There's a forum called the Speed Solving Forum. Also, you can talk to the makers of algorithm databases if you have an algorithm-based method, and so on. Obviously, you can go to competitions once they resume, and you can talk about your method to people who are competing. And if they find it nice, they might help you publicize and develop it yourself. And this is a quote that I have put on my website. If you want to read through it, you can read through it. I'll just give you the gist of it. The point is, method development has a big chunk dedicated to method publicity, and we feel like it should not be a part of method development, but the fact is it is. And it's not necessarily a bad thing, and it's not necessarily a good thing, but the point is it is extremely helpful. For some of you who go to the gym, you'll realize a good analogy is using the supplement called creatine. Creatine does not exactly help you gain a lot of muscle mass, but it helps you have more energy so that you can gain muscle mass faster. That's the general idea. uh, Publicizing your method will help you gain developers, which will help you develop the method faster, and that is why you try to publicize it as soon as possible. That's basically it. I tried to slightly extend the talk once I realized that Bhargav was not giving the talk. But unfortunately, I was not able to make it very beginner friendly because this is a topic that only people who already know how to solve a cube can understand. So I'm not entirely sure what more could have been done. So after this long 35-40 minutes talk, if you have any questions, please let me know. If there were any, by the time you put in your questions on the YouTube comment box, if there were any questions which were already asked on the YouTube comments, the other core team can ask me those questions.
Yeah, sure. So Siddhikant Mishra had asked, what's the
Right.
best time clocked on the Mehta method so far?
So the best time clocked on the Mehta method is 5.88 seconds. It was done by a person called Zeke McKay, if I'm pronouncing it correctly. He lives in the USA, and he solves using CFOP in about 9 seconds, as far as I'm aware. He used the Mehta method for about a month. He came down to about 10 to 11 seconds on average, but then he discontinued because he wanted to improve on Megamix. There are a couple of people who average about 10 seconds with the Mehta method, and we're still improving. I'm not entirely sure what other people are averaging. I've not talked to Matty or Timon yet about what they average. I'm pretty sure they are sub 10 with it, but I don't know.
Okay, so until someone else asks a question, I have a few questions to ask. Okay, Mayank Agarwal asked, from where can we learn the Mehta method?
So I gave the link to a GitHub page. That is a very good starting point to learn to know about the Mehta method. On that link, on that website, you'll find a lot of links to tutorials. Also, you can just look up YouTube and just search Mehta method tutorial or Mehta method beginner tutorial, and you'll find a couple of tutorials. Also, there is a Discord community for the Mehta method that has like 200, 300 people who are actively learning and using the Mehta method. So if you have any doubts, you can ask your questions on the Discord community. It's quite helpful. That's another good place to start. And from there on, you can figure it out yourself.
Okay, so the next question is from me. Uh, Most people nowadays use C4. And
Right.
do you think that Mehta method is an upgrade from C4?
So, in my personal biased view, yes, it definitely is an upgrade from CFOP. But obviously, we do not really have a lot of evidence to support that. At the end of the day, we can only theorize so much about a method because unless we put it into practice, we don't exactly know what the pitfalls are for a 7-second solver or a 6-second solver until somebody reaches that stage, right? So, given that it's been out there only for half a year and people have been getting sub 10 averages, I think it's a pretty good sign, but we'll know only in time if it's actually better.
And how hard it is for a CFOP solver to transition completely to being a Mehta method solver?
So it is usually easier for row method solvers because CFOP method solvers find it very hard to understand the concept of block building and making a 1 by 2 by 3, which is the first step of the Mehta method. Although you don't necessarily need to start like that, there are other variations. Usually what I've seen is people coming from Ru background improve very quickly in the beginning, and people coming from CFA background have a much better understanding of recognizing and learning algorithms. So later on, CFOP users start getting the upper hand. After all, Mehta is a very algorithmic method.
Okay. Okay. Mayank Agarwal has asked one more question. From where can we start learning the basic coding required for developing our own method for speed cubing?
The basic coding required for.
Basic coding required for developing our own method for speed cubing. Are
You
you able to
could.
hear me? Yeah, okay.
I don't know. So the way I did it was I just knew a bit of. Yes. Okay, I think there's a place where I learned coding from was basically my institute where we had a basic C course. I'm pretty sure most of your colleges will. I learned Python, and I did a bit of a competitive coding here and there. And once you do a bit of competitive coding, you'll just be able to understand everything that is required for this. I am not a very avid coder as such, so I'm not entirely I'm not entirely comfortable giving advice. There are people who can give much better advice than me. But I think starting with competitive coding is a good idea. Is a good place.
Okay, now Santosh Se has asked a question. Why isn't orienting last layer corners using a smaller subset of one L not spoken about, while orienting last layer edges and solving the cube using a bigger ZBLL is popular?
First of all, there are only 7 cases when you want to orient last layer corners. It's called COAL. I don't know what it's called. It's called something. There's a name for this. It's not a good algorithm set because first of all, you'll need a lot of M moves because your corners are already oriented, so you want to preserve that. So you'll probably need a lot of M moves, or you'll need long algorithms. And secondly, that algorithm set would be a giant algorithm set. It would have like I don't know. I estimate around 400 algorithms, and 400 algorithms is like a lot. So that's why I think it's not a very good idea to do that. Also, it does not help reduce move sets. A good alternative to this that people actually sometimes use is while inserting the last pair, they solve the corner permutation. I mean, you won't be able to make out really what it is, but what you do is basically if you put the corner, if you put solve one of the, if you permute, not orient, if you just permute one of the corners, the remaining 3 corners of the last layer will be in the correct locations. This is called CPLS, solving corner permutation during last slot. And then you can use a alg set called COALL, if I am not wrong. In that, you orient the corners while solving the edges. The reason this is a good idea is because you can solve the entire last step using only R, U, and R wide moves. So this is a very good alg set for one-handed solving because R, U, and R wide is a good alg set for one-handed solving. Uh, One important Another important thing that I forgot to mention was yes, COLL also has like 450 algorithms, so it's not ideal for every case because you'll have to memorize a lot of algorithms, and 450 algorithms is pushing it for most of us. Any other questions?
Okay. Any other questions, guys? Yeah, I don't think there are any more questions.
Right. All right. So I had a lot of fun giving this talk. I hope it sparked a bit of development to at least a couple of you. Method development is extremely interesting. The thing is, very few people in the world are into this thing, and I'm pretty sure, especially for big cubes, there are a lot of methods that are yet to be discovered that are much better than reduction and yaw, which are the current popular methods. So I think it'll be great if you get into method development, especially if in some cases.
Yeah, I mean, I
That's all.
personally
Thank
have
you.
been
Thank you
cubing
for
for,
inviting me.
yeah, I personally have been cubing for about 3 to 4 years now, and I've always looked at the speed cubing aspect of it, like never really gone into method development. And a lot of people that I know have never really talked about method development as well. And it was really enjoying to talk about this aspect of cubing. Okay, Vrinda Rathi has asked a few questions. Does one have to know a lot of group theory for developing methods? Or otherwise, would that give a different perspective?
Okay. You it might help you. I'm just guessing at this point. I'm pretty sure it's not important to know group theory. It's much more important to be creative, to be able to shuffle a couple of steps and have the experience and understanding of a lot more methods in the past. Because group theory, I'm not entirely sure how you'd apply it to speed cubing. That's all.
Okay. So if anyone has any more questions, feel free to write down them. Or shall we proceed to end this talk?
Yeah, if there are no questions, we can definitely proceed.
Okay, then we are ending this informative talk by Mr. Yash Mehta. Thank you for coming and giving us this talk. This
Thank you so
talk
much for
was,
inviting me.
yeah, thank you. This talk was sponsored by CubeLayer.com, by the way, and this talk was organized by Tenacity uh, under by all ISO Speed Cubing community. So thank you everyone for joining, and we are ending the stream now.